Our story begins with a boy named Shizuki, a high school student. One day, as he walked into his classroom, he happened to overhear a group of girls talking about him. They told a girl that they had seen her talking to Shizuki, and even thought she was hanging out with a weirdo. The girl replied that Shizuki was disgusting, nothing special at all. But she added that if they befriended a loser like him, wouldn't it make them stand out more? Hearing this, the group of girls quietly commented that she was truly vicious. Shizuki, who overheard these words, felt his heart twist in pain. It was a painful memory from Shizuki's past. The day he realized the cruelty hidden behind beauty and understood his low place in everyone's eyes, leaving him with an endless sorrow. Now, in the classroom, Shizuki was sitting alone when a male classmate approached and asked him to go to lunch together. Shizuki politely replied that he would join after he finished his notes. His friend remarked that Shizuki wrote too slowly. Shizuki denied it, explaining that it was hard for him to see the board from the back of the class. The boy agreed and added that Shizuki should hurry, or Harino would take his spot. Shizuki nodded in agreement. When his friend left, Shizuki felt overjoyed that his plan had worked perfectly. He remembered the day he decided to start over in high school and how he had worked hard to fix all his flaws. After just 1 week, he had become part of the social middle class he had always longed for, especially since he had been a nobody in middle school. To Shizuki, this feeling was a complete success. He recalled getting into a pretty good school, one where no one knew about his obscure past, except for one person, Shizuka Kusunoki. This girl was a classmate from his middle school and was rumored to be the most beautiful girl in their year. As soon as she enrolled, there were countless stories about her being confessed to or being a model. Shizuki had never spoken to her directly, but he believed he understood her well. According to Shizuki, Kusunoki was just like him, someone with a past she wanted to hide. Although they were in different classes, they had gone to the library together before, so they knew of each other. At that moment, a group of boys was standing next to Kusunoki. Shizuki stood up, telling himself that he had decided never to get involved with beautiful girls again. He firmly told himself that staying away from Kusunoki was for the best. Shizuki left the classroom thinking that even though they both belonged to the lowest social tier, he didn't believe they would ever bring it up in the future. As Shizuki was walking, he noticed Kusunoki following and watching him. Suddenly, she stepped right in front of him, calling out so loudly that everyone around turned to look, wondering what was happening. But she only called out Shizuki's name. Shizuki was completely stunned, unsure of what to do in this situation. He had thought they might walk the same way home, but he never expected her to initiate a conversation. He also worried about what she could possibly want from him. Tears began to fall from Kusunoki's eyes as she apologized to Shizuki with a heavy heart. Shizuki was surprised by her action. And then Kusunoki said she was in big trouble and really hoped Shizuki could talk with her. Shizuki wondered what could be troubling her. Kusunoki politely explained that since they went to the same middle school, only Shizuki could help her. With a cute smile, she added that it had been a while and she just wanted to quickly tell him that he had changed a lot. Hearing this, Shizuki was surprised and felt anxious, shouting back that she had changed a lot too. Kusunoki was shocked by Shizuki's outburst. Realizing what he had just done, Shizuki quickly stopped, but Kusunoki was still stunned, worriedly asking if he was okay. It seemed she had accidentally triggered his symptoms. Ever since the day Shizuki's heart was shattered by the gaze of a beautiful woman, he had suffered from a strange illness that caused him to endure mysterious health problems. Shizuki calmly told Kusunoki that it was nothing and suggested they move to the park to talk since it was too crowded there. They both went to the park and sat on a bench. Kusunoki politely asked Shizuki if he understood her situation. In other words, she had changed her appearance but couldn't change who she was inside. She had tried to avoid communicating, but now she felt exhausted. Shizuki asked if she had come to him for help because they had attended the same middle school. Kusunoki confirmed that Shizuki was right. Shizuki looked down at the ground and thought that maybe he could have helped her if he hadn't accidentally looked into her eyes. He tried to reassure her, saying that he wasn't very good at communicating either. Kusunoki was surprised and replied that wasn't true. She politely said that Shizuki talked to everyone in class normally and already had friends, and she really admired him for that. Shizuki was also surprised, asking what she meant, and pointed out that she had friends too. Kusunoki lowered her head and sadly said that she didn't have anyone. Shizuki was astonished, unable to believe what he had just heard. Kusunoki explained that she didn't consider Shizuki's friends to be real friends, just because they talked to him. As for the girls in her class, it seemed they were avoiding her. Shizuki was surprised, looking at her with curiosity. He suddenly realized that from an outsider's perspective, Kusunoki was always surrounded by boys, which could create a bad impression of her. He had thought she was a successful person, never imagining her situation was exactly like his. Kusunoki sighed, saying that even though she could change her appearance, she couldn't change the person she was inside, so it was all meaningless. She continued, saying that in middle school she was always alone because she was a bad person. Looking at her, Shizuki was suddenly reminded of his own past. Abruptly, he shot up from the bench, shouting at her that she needed to be more confident. Kusunoki was completely surprised by this change. Shizuki continued to ask her why she wanted to change so badly, adding that changing her appearance that much proved she must have put in a lot of effort. He advised her to take small steps, reassuring her that if she got used to communicating, things would become easier. As Shizuki was shouting at her, he suddenly realized he was looking into Kusunoki's eyes without feeling any discomfort, and he was also speaking without being overwhelmed by frustration or anxiety. Shizuki quickly grabbed his bag and prepared to leave, but Kusunoki hurried to stop him, begging him to wait. Shizuki turned back to look at her, stunned. Kusunoki asked him how she could start taking such small steps. Shizuki politely suggested that if she could make one friend to talk to, the rest would become easier. Suddenly, Kusunoki asked if he wanted to be friends with her. Shizuki stared at her with wide eyes, completely stunned. She explained that he was someone she could talk to, then started begging him to be her friend. Shizuki was confused, wondering why Kusunoki would want to be friends with him. He thought to himself that if Kusunoki improved her communication skills, she would become more and more popular. Eventually, her personality might change, and then she would realize where she truly belonged. Shizuki realized that those thoughts made sense, but looking at Kusunoki's sad face, he didn't have the heart to refuse. After a moment's hesitation, he accepted her offer. Kusunoki was stunned to hear that, her eyes welling up with tears as she joyfully thanked him for his kindness. Shizuki calmly added that while they would be friends, this was just a temporary arrangement until she made other friends. Kusunoki smiled sweetly, replying that she was still very happy about it. Looking at her radiant face, Shizuki suddenly wondered if there was something special about Kusunoki's eyes, and questioned if he was already cured of his strange illness. Kusunoki thanked him again, calling him her friend and saying she was very happy to have met him. Shizuki thought that he still didn't fully understand the situation, but if it didn't cause any symptoms, then perhaps it was a good thing. Even though they were friends now, he told himself their relationship wouldn't change all that much. The next day, during lunch break, Shizuki was sitting at his desk to eat lunch as usual. Suddenly, Kusunoki walked over and sat down right in front of him. Shizuki felt awkward, telling himself that just because they were friends didn't mean a boy and a girl would normally sit facing each other like this. He was confused, not understanding what Kusunoki was thinking. When the other students saw the scene, they started to whisper amongst themselves. Some of the girls murmured that Kusunoki was quick to make a move on Shizuki. Meanwhile, some of the boys wondered why Kusunoki was sitting with him. Shizuki was stunned, thinking that everyone was completely misunderstanding the situation. With a bright and polite smile, Kusunoki gently said that she had always wanted to eat lunch with a friend just like this. Shizuki was taken aback by her words. Just then, some of Shizuki's friends approached, teasing that they would go eat in the cafeteria by themselves and encouraging him to take his time and enjoy the moment. Shizuki felt his annoyance growing. He turned to Kusunoki, about to say something, but she politely asked, "Shizuki, is something wrong?" Instead, Shizuki slumped his head onto the desk and sullenly said that there was nothing to say. This, he thought to himself, is what I get for helping people. But looking at Kusunoki, who'd never had the chance to eat lunch with friends before, Shizuki felt a twinge of sympathy. He decided that, just for today, he would play along with this friend game. With a cute expression, Kusunoki asked if she could start calling him Keisuke from now on. Shizuki looked momentarily confused, but Kusunoki repeated herself, saying that since they were friends now, it only made sense. Finally, Shizuki reluctantly agreed and told her to do whatever she wanted. He got up from his seat, saying he was going to buy them both a drink. Kusunoki immediately said she would go with him. Little did Shizuki know that his dream of a peaceful high school life was about to be completely shattered. As the two of them walked down the hall, Shizuki suddenly came face to face with an even greater threat. Standing before him was the very person who had bullied him all through middle school. Shizuki's heart started to pound, and the familiar symptoms resurfaced. Kusunoki, noticing his expression, worriedly asked, "Are you okay?" Shizuki turned to look at her, his eyes filled with terror. He couldn't believe this was actually happening. He realized that the source of the greatest trauma in his life was standing right in front of him. He thought back, remembering how he had carefully checked the class lists and hadn't seen the name Takasaki Risa. Yet here, Hebawa was. Just then, another girl called out Hebawa's name, asking what was wrong. Hebawa turned and asked Shizuki if he was okay. Shizuki quickly turned away, covering his face and curtly replying that he was fine. Hebawa then asked Kusunoki if she was friends with Shizuki. Kusunoki confirmed that she was. Hebawa glanced at Shizuki one more time, commenting that he didn't look well and should probably go to the nurse's office. She stepped closer, gently told Shizuki to take care of himself, and then left. Shizuki, watching Hebawa go, couldn't stop thinking about her eyes, her voice, and the ribbon in her hair. He was certain there was no mistake. That was the person who had turned his middle school years into a nightmare. Shizuki clutched his head in panic, telling himself his peaceful high school days were over. Seeing this, Kusunoki worriedly suggested taking him to the nurse's office, even offering to carry him on her back if he couldn't walk. However, Shizuki's focus remained on Hebawa, his mind filled with resolve. He loudly declared that he wouldn't let it end like this. Kusunoki was startled by his sudden outburst. Shizuki added that he wouldn't let Hebawa ruin his life, explaining that he had chosen to make a fresh start in high school for a reason. He stressed that he had said goodbye to his past and to Hebawa a long time ago. As Shizuki shouted his declarations, Kusunoki was stunned and had no idea what was going on. Nevertheless, startled, she simply nodded along with everything he was saying. Afterward, Kusunoki timidly asked if he felt better now. Shizuki replied that he was fine, telling himself that as long as he focused on school, there wouldn't be any problems. He was determined to protect the peaceful high school life he had worked so hard to achieve. As the school day came to an end and everyone was still in the classroom, Kusunoki approached Shizuki with a shy look on her face, asking if they could walk home together. For Shizuki, this was truly a massive ordeal. When the other students heard this, they all looked surprised. Meanwhile, Shizuki began to stammer, flustered. Kusunoki asked if he had to go somewhere else. Shizuki, in his haste, lied and said yes. Hearing this, Kusunoki smiled gently and replied that if that was the case, it was fine. She could wait for him. Shizuki felt guilty, thinking that Kusunoki's smile was just too dazzling. A few of the boys in the class walked over, teasing that walking home together sounded like fun. Shizuki started to sweat as one of his friends put a hand on his shoulder, saying that Shizuki seemed pretty close to Kusunoki. Another friend asked if Shizuki was dating Kusunoki. Shizuki was horrified, worrying that if these popular kids started paying attention to him, things would only get worse. He hastily replied that they weren't dating and quickly ran off. His friends watched him go, commenting that it was a shame he had to go home today. Then they turned to Kusunoki and suggested she should go with them instead of waiting for Shizuki. A little later, Shizuki was walking down the street in a foul mood, muttering that it was a really terrible day and nothing good had happened. He also felt bad for leaving Kusunoki behind. As he was walking with these thoughts, he suddenly heard Kusunoki's voice calling him from behind. When he turned around, he was completely shocked to see Kusunoki standing there. Kusunoki greeted him politely, which made Shizuki flustered and anxious as he asked her why she was here. Kusunoki replied that she had run after him, complaining that she was exhausted. Shizuki asked if she had really run to catch up with him and wondered why she would go to such lengths. With a cute, beaming face, Kusunoki replied that she wanted to walk home with him. Shizuki anxiously put a hand to his face, trying to hide his expression, and Kusunoki asked if he didn't like that. He replied that it wasn't that he hated it, but said loudly that even though they were friends, it wasn't normal for a boy and a girl to walk home together. Kusunoki was stunned by his words. Shizuki continued, explaining that even eating lunch together wasn't ideal for either of them. Kusunoki asked in surprise why that would look so bad. Shizuki explained that other people might get the wrong idea about their relationship. After saying that, he continued walking and told her not to talk so much in class. Still, in his heart, Shizuki thought that maybe Kusunoki had gotten his point. But just then, she called out to him again, saying that she hadn't had many opportunities to talk with other people. Kusunoki asked Shizuki for advice on how she could create more opportunities to interact with everyone. Shizuki felt sorry for Kusunoki. She then politely asked if she could call him in the evenings from now on. Shizuki turned back to look at her and asked loudly if she meant on the phone. Kusunoki confirmed, explaining that they could talk on the phone without fear of anyone misunderstanding. She repeated her request. Shizuki thought that calling a female friend in the evening was inappropriate. He wondered if Kusunoki was being strange, or if he was the one overthinking it. However, Kusunoki continued to ask with a very polite demeanor, leaving Shizuki completely flustered. Later, when he got home, Shizuki was lying on his bed, staring at his phone. It was already 2 a.m., and he glanced at Kusunoki's number, saved in his contacts, and thought back to the moment she had suggested calling. At the time, he had been flustered but had agreed to her request. Now, they both had each other's numbers. When Kusunoki had seen Shizuki's number in her contacts, she had looked surprised and politely asked if she could call him that night. Shizuki was taken aback at first, but had agreed. However, he said that he would be the one to call her. Kusunoki agreed and said she would wait for his call. Shizuki said that because he needed to mentally prepare himself first. Kusunoki smiled sweetly and said she would wait. Shizuki lay in bed, thinking about what he should do next. He didn't really want to call and had no idea what to talk about. He told himself it had been so long since they'd last talked that he had no ideas. While he lay there thinking, Shizuki's gaze landed on his alarm clock. He picked it up and set a 10-minute timer, deciding that the call would only last for 10 minutes. Then, Shizuki dialed the number and made the call. When the call connected, Shizuki started with a greeting and introduced himself. Kusunoki responded with her name. Shizuki apologized for calling so late, but Kusunoki reassured him and thanked him for calling. After that, an awkward silence fell between them, and Shizuki realized he was being awkward and needed to say something. He started with some small talk, asking if it was colder today than yesterday. Kusunoki replied that it was. Shizuki added that he has a hard time with cold weather and asked about her preferences. Kusunoki just replied briefly that she didn't mind it much. Shizuki felt uneasy, thinking that Kusunoki wasn't much of a talker and was making the conversation awkward. At that moment, Shizuki realized there were only 5 minutes left, so he decided he had to find a safe topic. He asked Kusunoki about her hobbies or something like that. Kusunoki replied that she liked watching anime and reading manga. Shizuki was surprised by this hobby and said that he liked those things too. He asked her what genres she liked, and Kusunoki began to explain in great detail. After listening to her talk for a long time, Shizuki felt uncomfortable, thinking she had become way too talkative. When she talked about her favorite series, Shizuki blurted out that she sounded like a typical otaku. Kusunoki then asked if Shizuki had a favorite manga. Shizuki thought about his favorite childhood manga and replied that he liked a series called Asterisk. Kusunoki immediately lit up, saying she loved it too and even owned all the volumes. Suddenly, the alarm clock rang. Shizuki looked over, and Kusunoki asked what that sound was. Shizuki replied that it was nothing, then asked if she had heard the rumor about a third installment of the manga being released next year. Kusunoki grew curious, asking Shizuki to tell her more about it. The next day, as Shizuki was sitting in class feeling dazed, he checked his phone and noticed the call time with Kusunoki. He was surprised to see the call had lasted for 1 hour and 32 minutes. He couldn't understand how their conversation had gone on for so long, feeling a bit bewildered. He told himself that it was probably because he was also an otaku at heart, which was why they got along so easily. Suddenly, Kusunoki entered the classroom. Shizuki noticed she looked sad, and he couldn't help but be surprised to see her that way. Kusunoki put her bag on the desk and wished Shizuki a good morning. Shizuki replied, "Morning." He looked at her and wondered what had happened, since she was so cheerful just yesterday. Then Shizuki shook his head, realizing he didn't need to worry about it. He decided that during class, he should avoid talking to Kusunoki as much as possible. With that thought, Shizuki tried not to talk to her, but he couldn't stop himself from glancing her way. When school was over and everyone was getting ready to leave, Shizuki called out to Kusunoki in the hallway. He approached her, and she asked what was wrong. Shizuki replied that it was nothing, but he felt awkward, unsure of what to say. Finally, he calmly said that he noticed she seemed down today, even though he had originally planned to say nothing. Kusunoki started talking about their phone call from the night before. She realized she had been talking the entire time and felt very sorry. She sat down, her face full of regret. Shizuki was surprised by her reaction and thought she was feeling terrible about it. He comforted her, saying their call was meant to help her get used to conversing and that she didn't need to worry. It wasn't a big deal. Despite that, Kusunoki was still upset. She said the conversation felt very one-sided, that she was the only one having fun, and now she felt awful. Shizuki felt guilty and gently told her she didn't need to apologize. Shizuki continued to comfort her, saying that their conversation was actually really interesting. Kusunoki was surprised by his comment. Suddenly, Shizuki's friends, Hirano and Tsuji, appeared. Shizuki was startled to see them, and they asked what he was doing, saying they'd been looking for him since he suddenly disappeared. They came closer and asked if they were interrupting something. One of them added that it looked like Shizuki had forgotten all about his friends. Shizuki politely assured them that wasn't the case. Then, Hirano asked what the relationship was between Shizuki and Kusunoki. Suddenly, Shizuki hastily said goodbye to Kusunoki, surprising her with his abruptness. Shizuki told her to go home, and she agreed. His friends watched with disappointed looks and politely asked if he really wasn't going with Kusunoki. They apologized to Shizuki for their earlier comments, but Shizuki reassured them, insisting he'd already said he wasn't involved in that kind of thing. Meanwhile, Kusunoki was on her way home when she suddenly stopped, turned back, and called out to Shizuki with a bright smile. She said she also had a lot of fun talking last night and wished him a good day. Shizuki and his friends were completely taken aback by this. Shizuki worried about what his friends would say next. His friends gave him an annoyed look and teased that it seemed like he had a lot of fun last night. Shizuki quickly explained that it wasn't like that, insisting it was just a misunderstanding. In the classroom, Hirano asked Shizuki with a straight face if he really wasn't up to something with Kusunoki. Shizuki tried to stay calm, repeating that they didn't have that kind of relationship. Hirano admitted he didn't quite believe him. Shizuki felt a headache coming on from all the questions, realizing that it was Kusunoki's vague words that had made everything so complicated. Tsuji added that Shizuki was the only one Kusunoki called by name, and they seemed really close. Tsuji also said that, in his eyes, the two of them looked pretty intimate. Hirano agreed with Tsuji. Shizuki explained that he and Kusunoki simply went to the same middle school, and she was his closest friend from his group back then. Hirano was surprised to hear they went to the same middle school. Hirano said that Shizuki was so lucky, then commented that Kusunoki must have been very beautiful back then, and that he wished he could have seen her. Hearing this, Shizuki stood up and loudly told them to stop and end the conversation. His friends looked at him confused. Hirano then said he wanted to be friends with Kusunoki too, and asked Shizuki if he could set up a lunch for them all together. Shizuki stepped forward and firmly refused. He thought that it was impossible, since Kusunoki had trouble communicating and Hirano couldn't sit still. As Shizuki was walking down the stairs, the thought of Kusunoki and Hirano meeting gave him a headache. Then he realized that if they could get along, he wouldn't have to worry about Kusunoki making friends anymore. He told himself that if he could pull this off, a threat to his peaceful life would be eliminated. Just then, from the other side of the hall, Hebawa approached and they bumped into each other, causing her books to fall. Shizuki quickly apologized and asked Hebawa if she was all right. When Shizuki saw Hebawa, he was surprised to find her sitting on the floor. Hebawa commented that they kept bumping into each other, then laughed cutely and said it seemed like they had a habit of meeting this way. Suddenly, Shizuki bowed his head and began to cry out in frustration. Hebawa was taken aback by his reaction. Just then, Tsuji arrived and took in the situation, noticing that Shizuki seemed to be having a breakdown. Tsuji approached and asked what was wrong. Hebawa explained that she thought Shizuki had suddenly fallen ill. Tsuji was surprised by her explanation. While Hebawa turned to Shizuki and politely asked if he could stand up. She asked Tsuji to help her pick up the fallen books. As they helped Shizuki and gathered the books, Hebawa remarked what good friends they were. And with a sweet smile, she told Shizuki to take care of himself. After Hebawa left, Tsuji suddenly grabbed Shizuki and asked if he was friends with her. Shizuki, trembling, adamantly denied it and insisted that Tsuji had misunderstood, that he had no relationship with Hebawa whatsoever. Hirano asked Tsuji if he knew Hebawa. Tsuji replied that he did, saying he knew all the pretty girls in their grade. He explained that Hebawa was in the 8th class and was rumored to be the second prettiest girl in their year. Hirano then asked who the prettiest girl was. Tsuji replied that the prettiest girl was Kusunoki. Shizuki turned to Tsuji with a look of displeasure, asking if that meant he should feel grateful just for being friends with Kusunoki. Tsuji replied that he'd like a chance to get to know her better too, and asked Shizuki for his help. Shizuki agreed to ask Kusunoki. Tsuji was delighted to hear that. Later, Shizuki called Kusunoki and asked if they could have lunch together. Kusunoki refused, saying she wasn't interested. Shizuki was surprised and asked if she was really turning him down. Kusunoki confirmed that she was. Shizuki was taken aback by how bluntly Kusunoki rejected his lunch invitation. Kusunoki asked what he wanted to discuss, since he had mentioned needing to ask her something. Shizuki explained that he wanted her to think of it as a short course to improve his communication skills, stressing that she had nothing to lose by joining. Kusunoki clarified that when she talked about eating together, she only meant that Hirano would be joining. Shizuki added that Tsuji would be there as well, and he politely asked if she would be comfortable with an extra person. Shizuki reassured Kusunoki that Hirano would be a better friend than he was. But to his surprise, Kusunoki disagreed. She said that if they were going to have lunch, Shizuki had to be there. Otherwise, she wouldn't join, and the sadness on her face was clear. Shizuki noticed her gloomy expression and asked if she was mad at him, apologizing as he felt responsible for her sadness. Kusunoki said she was going to bed and hung up. Shizuki looked at his phone, noticing their call had lasted about 15 minutes, and felt confused, wondering if she was angry with him or if he had said something wrong. Meanwhile, Kusunoki was sitting on her floor feeling sad. The next day, Shizuki and Kusunoki went to the cafeteria for lunch, along with Tsuji and Hirano. As they sat around the table enjoying their meal, Hirano commented that for some reason, the food tasted especially good today. Shizuki looked over at Tsuji, expecting his opinion, but Tsuji, with his usual attitude, just shrugged and replied that it was nothing special. Shizuki casually sipped his juice. He observed the group, feeling that Hirano seemed a little too excited. As his gaze passed over Kusunoki, she was eating silently with a sad expression on her face, and it pained Shizuki to see her like that. He wondered if she was okay, realizing she hadn't said a single word. Suddenly, Hirano curiously asked Kusunoki if she went to the same middle school as Shizuki. Kusunoki was a bit surprised by the question. Shizuki explained that although they went to the same school, they were in different classes and only started talking in high school. Tsuji casually remarked that it meant they hadn't been friends for very long. Then Hareno stood up, a flustered smile on his face, and told Shizuki that although he was a bit nervous, he wanted to be friends with Kusunoki too. He held out his hand and asked for her phone number, offering his in return. This sudden move left everyone surprised and silent. Kusunoki didn't respond, making Hareno realize she was ignoring him. He quickly apologized for his abrupt approach. Shizuki observed the situation, then turned to Kusunoki and gently reassured her that it was okay and that he thought she and Hareno would be good friends. He added that once Kusunoki got to know Hareno better, she'd see he was a pretty earnest and kind person. Kusunoki, still quiet and a little flustered, trusted Shizuki and agreed. She smiled and said that if Shizuki said so, she would do it. Both Tsuji and Hareno were stunned by Kusunoki's response. Hareno quickly thanked Kusunoki for her kindness and asked her to wait a moment since he didn't have his phone with him. Shizuki said Hareno's phone was probably in the classroom. Hareno promised to be right back. A while later at school, Shizuki and Hareno were standing next to each other. Hareno clasped his hands together and sincerely thanked Shizuki for helping him connect with Kusunoki. Shizuki humbly said that he hadn't really done much. However, Hareno insisted it was all thanks to Shizuki. He said he never thought he'd be able to exchange contact info with Kusunoki. Watching Hareno, Shizuki realized he seemed especially happy about this. He noticed Hareno's obvious joy showed that he really liked Kusunoki. Shizuki smiled and said that Hareno was experiencing the wonders of youth. After that, Shizuki politely asked if they were done and if they should head back to class. However, Hareno stopped him, saying he had one more request. Shizuki started to sweat, wondering what it could be. Hareno's request was for him and Kusunoki to have lunch together. Shizuki agreed and sent a text message to Kusunoki on Hareno's behalf. As he sent the message, Shizuki felt a surge of anger, thinking that Hareno should have just asked Kusunoki himself. However, he sent it anyway because Hareno had begged him, saying he was too shy to make the request directly. Shizuki also wondered if Hareno was too shy to even ask Kusunoki to lunch in person. Why did he still want her phone number? A little while later, Shizuki was sitting in the classroom and Kusunoki was there as well. When she picked up her phone, Shizuki noticed she had seen his message. He motioned to get her attention, but when she looked at him, she suddenly looked down, appearing sad, and said nothing. Shizuki was stunned and confused by her reaction. He thought that Kusunoki might be deliberately avoiding him and wondered if she was angry, which would explain her actions. He couldn't figure out why she would feel that way. Just then, Tsuji approached Shizuki to say goodbye as class was ending. Shizuki returned the greeting in silence. Kusunoki stood up, grabbed her bag, and walked out. Shizuki realized that she had been acting strangely ever since their phone call yesterday, and her attitude during lunch today was no different. Suddenly, Shizuki put a hand to his head, feeling a wave of anxiety. He told himself he needed to stop overthinking things with girls and get a grip. Shizuki decided he wouldn't worry about Kusunoki's mood anymore. Whether she was angry or not, it wasn't his problem. As Kusunoki quietly left the school, Shizuki followed her, and soon they were standing together on the street. With a polite but somewhat anxious expression, Kusunoki asked him what was wrong. Shizuki was silent, looking at the ground, feeling uncomfortable about having to ask about her behavior. However, he finally asked her why she was avoiding him. Kusunoki simply responded by asking if they should even be talking to each other. Shizuki was confused by her answer. Kusunoki went on to point out that he was the one who said he didn't want her talking to him at school. Hearing that, Shizuki felt a pang of guilt, and he realized Kusunoki knew exactly how to make a point. Kusunoki turned and started to walk away, leaving Shizuki to watch her go. She said that she knew he hated her. Shizuki was shocked by the accusation, while Kusunoki glanced back at him and continued, saying she could sense the change in his attitude, that he was pushing her away from his friends. With a sad expression, Kusunoki sighed, saying she knew he wanted to end their friendship, and that was why she'd been acting that way. At that moment, Shizuki realized Kusunoki might be right, even though he was the one who had seen her in difficult situations, just like he had experienced, and had reached out to her. He became aware of her feelings and began to feel regret. Shizuki understood that he had been so caught up in his own emotions that he had unintentionally treated Kusunoki as if she were unimportant. He sat in silence, remembering a time in his childhood when he'd approached someone with a hopeful heart, wanting to be their friend. Back then, that person had rejected Shizuki's offer of friendship and apologized. Shizuki now realized just how deeply that kind of action could hurt someone. Realizing he had been in the wrong, Shizuki approached Kusunoki, sincerely apologized, and asked for her forgiveness. Kusunoki sat down on the ground, her expression still sad, as she politely admitted that she wasn't good at talking to boys. She said that she was bullied in middle school, and ever since then, boys have always made her feel scared. Shizuki pointed out that he was a boy too. Kusunoki quickly looked at him, firmly saying that he was an exception, different from the others. Kusunoki went on to say that back in middle school, Shizuki was always in the library just like her, and they were in the same class. She admitted that she never thought they'd end up in the same high school or have so much in common. Kusunoki said that she felt comfortable being with Shizuki, and that was why she was willing to let him be her only male friend, even though she really wanted more friends. Shizuki sat down beside her, tears streaming down his face. He said that he understood and that he wouldn't try to find more friends for her anymore. Kusunoki thought to herself, while Shizuki felt his own heart thumping, fast and hard. Then Kusunoki revealed that her heart was pounding just as hard. Shizuki was surprised to hear this, and Kusunoki gave him a warm smile, politely saying that this was the first time she'd ever had a disagreement with a friend. Shizuki's gaze fixed, and he realized this was the first time he'd ever had a disagreement with a female friend, and that's why his heart was pounding too. Kusunoki stood up and politely asked if they could continue talking to each other again, even at school. Shizuki agreed, and Kusunoki walked away with a happy heart. Shizuki watched her from behind, still feeling confused and wondering if there was some other reason why his heart was pounding so hard. The next day, while they were in the classroom, a teacher walked in with a cheerful expression. She announced that to help all the new students get to know each other, they would be holding a traditional dodgeball tournament, where all the classes would compete against one another. The teacher continued, saying that since not everyone could be on the same team, they would draw lots to decide the team members. Hearing this, Shizuki felt sad, thinking the teacher must see them as children for organizing a dodgeball tournament. He worried that he might get picked to play and ruin the game in front of everyone, which would be incredibly embarrassing. He also realized that if they competed against other classes, Hebawa would be there too, which made him even more anxious. Shizuki stepped up to draw lots, feeling extremely nervous and on edge. Just the thought of being chosen made him feel sick to his stomach, and he prayed with all his might that he wouldn't be picked. He begged for the strength to get through this ordeal. After drawing, Shizuki and the others sat on the stairs. Shizuki was still in a gloomy mood, while Tsuji and Hareno were cheerful. Tsuji was drinking a juice box, and the others were also eating and drinking comfortably. In a calm voice, Tsuji said that luck seemed to be on Shizuki's side, and that he wished he could play too. Shizuki felt a sense of unease as he drew, and even though he'd had a bad feeling, the result was still the same. He simply sighed, saying he wanted to go home. Tsuji nodded in agreement, saying that just cheering for their team was pretty boring, and he wanted to leave too. Hareno, in a loud, clear voice, remarked that the group's morale was way too low, and he urged everyone to get excited. With that, Hareno immediately bounded up the stairs. Tsuji wondered where all this enthusiasm was coming from, reminding him that he wasn't even on the team, so he should probably calm down. Hareno, with a mischievous grin, replied, "Think about it for a second. We don't normally get to have PE with the girls, but today is different. They'll be wearing their gym clothes, and just getting to see that is enough." Tsuji and Shizuki remained calm, their eyes fixed forward. Seeing their lack of enthusiasm, Hareno got annoyed and told them not to ignore him. Just then, Kusunoki appeared and called out Shizuki's name, saying she'd finally found him. Kusunoki was also in her regular clothes, and the teachers were about to explain the rules and wanted all the team members to come to the gym. She asked Shizuki if he wanted to go with her. Before Shizuki could even answer, Hareno immediately said that Shizuki would go. Hareno ordered him to go at once. Shizuki was surprised by the demand and realized Kusunoki must have been chosen for the team. He told her that he hadn't finished eating yet, so she could go on ahead. Hareno sternly warned Shizuki that he had no right to refuse Kusunoki's invitation and demanded that he go immediately. Shizuki reluctantly agreed and went with Kusunoki. As they walked, Kusunoki asked if he was sure it was okay. Shizuki reassured her that it was fine and told her not to worry. As he looked at her more closely, Shizuki noticed her face was glowing with excitement. He commented that she looked really excited. Kusunoki was surprised to hear him say that. Shizuki explained that he thought she disliked these kinds of events, and he was surprised to see she was actually enjoying it. With a slightly flustered look, Kusunoki said that it was true. She didn't like them. But then she smiled and added that this time it might be fun because they would be playing together. Shizuki was taken aback by her words and suddenly turned his face away, feeling it grow hot. He thought to himself that it must be a particularly warm day today. When they arrived at the gathering area, the teacher stood at the front and cheerfully announced that Class A's first match would be against Class B. Hearing this, Shizuki grew anxious, groaning that he couldn't take it. Suddenly, Hareno appeared and called out to Shizuki from behind, sarcastically chiding him for giving up before the match even started and telling him to show some fighting spirit. Shizuki was surprised to see Hareno there and asked why he had shown up when he wasn't in the game. Hareno replied that he had switched places with someone who didn't want to play. Hareno added that his greatest wish was to protect Kusunoki himself. Shizuki thought that if that was the case, why didn't Hareno just switch places with him? Meanwhile, a few other boys approached Hareno, insisting that they also wanted to protect Kusunoki and laughing at Hareno's cockiness. Hareno, furious, turned back to Shizuki and warned him that if he thought he could beat him, he was mistaken. Shizuki, confused, asked if they weren't supposed to be teammates. As they argued, a group of girls in the corner of the room watched them. The girls wondered why the boys were being so loud and annoying. Kusunoki happened to overhear their conversation. One girl commented that all of this was happening because of Kusunoki, and that the boys in their class were all idiots. Another girl agreed, saying Kusunoki was the center of it all, and that from what she could see, Kusunoki was like a total man-eater. Hearing these words, Kusunoki felt incredibly sad and bowed her head in shame. Shizuki noticed her sadness and approached her with concern. He politely asked Kusunoki if something was wrong. Kusunoki slapped her own cheeks hard and quickly insisted that she was fine. A short while later, the team lineup was finalized. Shizuki looked around nervously, his heart uneasy. The teacher announced that the match between Class A and Class B was about to begin. Hareno seemed eager, but Shizuki couldn't stop worrying about Hebawa. He scanned the opposing team and realized she wasn't on the court, nor was she standing behind the starting line. He wondered if maybe she hadn't come to school today. A wave of relief washed over Shizuki, and he silently thanked the heavens, thinking his prayers had been answered. He was genuinely glad that Hebawa hadn't shown up yet. However, just then, the teacher started looking around, confused, and asked if anyone was missing. Shizuki, with an innocent look, pretended to ask, "Who's not here yet?" At that exact moment, the sound of footsteps echoed, and Hebawa appeared. Shizuki's relief instantly vanished as he realized she had arrived after all. With a bright smile, Hebawa apologized to everyone for making them wait. She explained that it took her a while to change, but hoped they didn't mind. The teacher, despite her tardiness, happily accepted the apology and reminded her to be more punctual next time. The teacher then ordered everyone to line up. As Shizuki watched Hebawa, he felt sweat begin to form and his anxiety grew even stronger. Tsuji also watched Hebawa with a worried look and muttered that he couldn't have asked for more, Shizuki felt a deep sense of dread, thinking this was the worst-case scenario. However, he reminded himself to stay calm and face the situation rationally. He decided that there was now only one optimal course of action for him, and he resolved to act quickly. When the match began, the players started moving and passing the ball. Shizuki quickly got into position to catch the ball. Suddenly, Hirano stood in front of him and snatched it. Hirano apologized to Shizuki, saying that today was his chance to shine. Shizuki felt a surge of anger, but Hirano continued, saying he needed to impress Kusunoki with his skills. Hirano threw the ball, aiming for an opponent. But the ball accidentally slipped from his hand and flew straight toward Hebawa. Both Hirano and Shizuki were stunned by the unexpected turn of events. Just as the ball was about to hit Hebawa, another player rushed in and blocked it, saving her from the impact. That player, with a confident look on his face, declared that he would be the one to protect Hebawa. He turned to Hebawa and calmly assured her that he would take care of anyone who tried to target her. Hebawa thanked him with a sweet smile. Filled with anger, that player then threw the ball forcefully at Hirano, hitting him and knocking him hard to the ground. Shizuki watched with concern as Hirano fell, a wave of anxiety washing over him. Meanwhile, the members of the opposing team declared that they wouldn't lose this match. They attacked each other fiercely, throwing balls at one another. And they even started targeting the girls, creating a chaotic scene on the court. After a while, all the players had been eliminated from the game, leaving only Shizuki and Kusunoki on one side, and Hebawa with her rescuer on the other. Shizuki scanned the court, looking for an opportunity to grab the ball and make a move. The players on the sidelines cheered loudly, impressed that only 4 people were left. Feeling the tension, Shizuki thought to himself that this was the final part of the match, and he was still stuck here. He wondered what he should do next. From the sidelines, Hirano shouted to him, urging him to play his best and make sure Kusunoki didn't get hurt. Shizuki felt they had come a long way, but he still had to play defensively until the very end. He felt conflicted about having to protect Kusunoki, which made him feel like his hands were tied. While he was thinking about this, Kusunoki suddenly stepped forward and stood bravely in front of the opposing player. Shizuki was stunned, quickly telling her not to stand in front of that guy. He was worried for her safety, insisting that it was too dangerous to be near someone like that. The opposing player threw the ball at Kusunoki, declaring that he wouldn't go easy on her just because she was a girl, so she shouldn't expect any mercy. As the ball flew toward Kusunoki, Shizuki rushed forward, jumping in front of her to protect her. The powerful throw slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. Kusunoki was shocked by Shizuki's brave act. While Shizuki lay on the floor, groaning in pain, he lamented that he couldn't catch the ball, wondering why someone would throw it so hard at a girl. Shizuki thought that if he hadn't intervened, the ball would have hit Kusunoki really hard. As Shizuki lay on the ground, he suddenly remembered the things he had said about Kusunoki earlier. She walked over, looking at him with worry, her gaze gentle but full of concern. She asked if he was okay and apologized for everything. Seeing a painful scratch on Shizuki's arm, Kusunoki cried out in alarm, telling him he was hurt and urging him to see a doctor immediately. Shizuki reassured her, saying he was fine and advised her to stay away from that rough player, suggesting she should play defensively to protect herself. However, Kusunoki stood up, picked up the ball, and declared she would get revenge for Shizuki. Shizuki was surprised by her determination. With a surge of anger, Kusunoki stepped forward and threw the ball at the guy who had injured Shizuki. The throw was so powerful that the guy fell to the ground, instantly losing consciousness. The entire school was stunned by the power of the throw. The other players couldn't believe their eyes, exclaiming that it was impossible. Hebawa looked at the fallen player but remained silent. Then the teacher's voice rang out, announcing that Kusunoki's performance was amazing, as she'd taken down 2 opposing players with a single throw and declared Class A the winner. Kusunoki turned to Shizuki with a sweet smile. Shizuki was completely stunned. He thought about the situation, wondering if Kusunoki had always been this strong. He lowered his head, muttering that things had turned out better than he'd expected. Another girl worriedly asked Hebawa if she was okay after Kusunoki's throw. She remarked that Kusunoki was a true ace. Another girl approached Hebawa, laughing and saying she hoped her arm wasn't broken. Hebawa glared at her and angrily asked why she was laughing. The girl quickly apologized. Afterward, Shizuki and his friends were walking together. Tsuji commented that he never thought they would win the match. Hirano was thrilled, praising Kusunoki, saying he hadn't expected her to be so impressive. Meanwhile, Shizuki felt a little sad. Hirano suddenly remembered he forgot to say hi to Kusunoki and was about to go see her. Tsuji suggested that Hirano could just forget it, pointing out that something strange was going on. When Shizuki turned to look, he was surprised to see a crowd of boys gathered around Kusunoki, excitedly praising her bravery. Shizuki was surprised, thinking about her sudden popularity. He decided that maybe he should intervene and help her out a bit. Seeing the crowd around Kusunoki, Hirano commented on her newfound popularity. Tsuji agreed, remarking that Kusunoki was like the main character of a story, while they were just side characters from different worlds. He gave Hirano a little push, suggesting they should leave so as not to bother her anymore. As they left, Shizuki stood there watching Kusunoki with a sad expression. He lowered his head and followed them out, his mood sinking as he thought about what Tsuji said about them being from two different worlds. Suddenly, Kusunoki approached and asked if she had done something to upset him. Shizuki jumped, quickly replying that she had startled him and asked for a moment to catch his breath. Kusunoki noticed their eyes had met, and it seemed like Shizuki was trying to avoid her. Shizuki quickly reassured her, explaining that he didn't want to be a bother and thought it was better to step outside for a bit. Kusunoki drew closer, softly telling her she wasn't a bother at all. Shizuki was surprised by her words, seeing tears welling up in her eyes. Kusunoki admitted that she actually really wanted him to come over and talk to her. She explained that with so many people around, she felt overwhelmed and almost fainted. Shizuki looked at her expression and understood what she meant. Suddenly, Kusunoki lowered her head and let out a small sigh. Worried, Shizuki asked her if something was wrong. Kusunoki looked up, smiled sweetly, and said she was relieved they finally had a chance to talk. Shizuki replied that he was also happy to have this moment with her. He felt a wave of relief, knowing Kusunoki was okay. Hearing a small sound, Kusunoki curiously asked if he had said something. Shizuki replied that it was nothing, telling her not to worry about it. He turned around, smiled, and said they'd see each other again, reminding her to go change her clothes. Kusunoki felt confused by Shizuki's words, but she continued walking, thinking that if he told her to ignore something, it would surely just haunt her forever. As Kusunoki was thinking about Shizuki's words, Hebawa, the girl from the other day's match, suddenly appeared from another room. Kusunoki was startled to see Hebawa and commented that she was the one from Class B. Hebawa introduced herself, and Kusunoki realized that although she had recognized her during the match, she seemed even more charming now. Kusunoki's gaze then fell on Hebawa's arm, which was wrapped in a bandage. She worriedly asked if Hebawa was hurt. Hebawa nodded and said with a laugh that her arm had been swollen since the match. She went on to praise Kusunoki for being stronger than she looked. Kusunoki apologized sheepishly and gently suggested that if Hebawa wasn't feeling well, she could boil or fry something for her, if that would make her feel better. Hebawa reassured her, saying there was no need to make such a fuss, as her arm was fine now and didn't hurt anymore. Then Hebawa moved closer and said she found Kusunoki really interesting. She revealed that she'd been thinking about Kusunoki for a while now. Kusunoki was shocked and surprised by Hebawa's words. Hebawa politely asked if they could be friends, leaving Kusunoki completely taken aback by the offer. Kusunoki smiled awkwardly and asked, "You really want to be friends with me?" Hebawa confirmed with a smile, saying she'd be happy to be friends with a cute girl like Kusunoki. Kusunoki felt nervous about this new friendship, but she eventually agreed, telling Hebawa she looked forward to it. Hebawa then asked Kusunoki to call her Risa instead of Hebawa, Since she disliked her surname, Kusunoki agreed, and the two smiled and started walking together, happy about their new friendship. Suddenly, Kusunoki stopped and began to think deeply. She realized she needed to tell Shizuki about this new friendship. Politely, Kusunoki asked Hebawa if they could put their friendship on hold for a moment so she could talk to Shizuki first. That evening, Kusunoki called Shizuki and told him everything. Shizuki was stunned and asked if she had really become friends with Hebawa. Kusunoki confirmed, explaining that after the match, Hebawa had approached her and asked to be friends. Shizuki was surprised at first, but then he thought back to Kusunoki's impressive performance in the handball match. He realized that the positive impression she made on the other girls might have led to this new friendship. Shizuki understood the situation and remarked that it was good news, congratulating Kusunoki. However, she informed him that their friendship was still on hold. Shizuki curiously asked why. Kusunoki explained that if she didn't, she might have to end her friendship with him. This reminded Shizuki of what he had said before, that their friendship would end if she made a new friend, and that their relationship was only temporary. He realized he had forgotten about that. Kusunoki admitted that this was probably a bit selfish of her. She politely added that she wanted to spend more time with Shizuki. Confused, Shizuki asked why she would say that. Kusunoki explained that she liked him, leaving Shizuki stunned and speechless at her confession. She reassured him that she was telling the truth, explaining that he was the first real friend she'd ever had. Shizuki leaned back in his chair, confused about whether she meant as a friend or something more. He wondered why she was being so vague. Kusunoki quickly added that if her feelings made him uncomfortable, she would back off. Shizuki reassured her that it didn't bother him at all. When Kusunoki heard Shizuki's reply, she suddenly screamed into the phone with excitement. Shizuki was taken aback and asked her to stop screaming. She started laughing, apologizing for her outburst and expressing her joy at being able to continue their friendship. Meanwhile, Shizuki thought to himself that perhaps he'd been expecting too much. It was Kusunoki, after all. He figured she would probably say something like that if she made a new friend, but he felt it was a bit unfair to him. Kusunoki felt relieved and happy, excitedly saying that now she could share the good news with Risa. Shizuki then asked Kusunoki about her new friend. Kusunoki happily replied that her new friend was Risa Hebawa from Class B, adding that she would introduce her to Shizuki later. When Shizuki heard the name Hebawa, he was shocked and yelled into the phone. Kusunoki, surprised by his reaction, asked him not to shout like that. The next day at school, Shizuki sat alone at his desk in complete silence. Tsuji glanced over and asked, "What's wrong?" It's like his soul has left his body. Hareno commented that he didn't know what happened, but Shizuki had been like that since the morning. Meanwhile, Shizuki was lost in thought, worried that Kusunoki wasn't the one who initiated the friendship, but Hebawa. He wondered why Hebawa would do that and worried that their personalities might not be a good match. He was afraid that if things didn't go well, Kusunoki might get bullied. As he was mulling over these worries, Hareno suddenly looked out the window, a surprised look on his face. Hareno called out to Tsuji, "Hey, look outside! No way!" He pointed out that Kusunoki and Hebawa were standing together, chatting happily. Tsuji looked over, remarking that they seemed to be pretty close. He mused that it was the first time he'd ever seen Kusunoki hanging out with other girls. Hareno grinned, stressing that only the most beautiful and talented students could be friends with each other. When Shizuki heard that, he angrily yelled out, insisting that they were nothing alike. Hareno was surprised by Shizuki's reaction. After Shizuki left, Hareno turned to Tsuji and asked what was going on. Tsuji admitted he wasn't sure, only that while both Kusunoki and Hebawa were gorgeous, they were completely different. A little later, Shizuki and Kusunoki were cleaning the school hallway together. Kusunoki gently told Shizuki that she was planning on hanging out with Hebawa. Shizuki, surprised, asked if she was really going to hang out with her. Kusunoki replied that they were going out this Sunday. Shizuki's heart sank a little, wondering if they were already that close or if he'd completely misjudged the situation. Suddenly, a thought struck him. and he asked Kusunoki if she had told Hebawa about their time in middle school. Kusunoki replied that she had never mentioned it. Shizuki felt a wave of relief, thinking that if people found out he and Kusunoki went to the same middle school, it could spell trouble not just for her, but for him as well. While they were talking, Shizuki noticed a group of girls chatting on the floor above. He called Kusunoki over to a corner under the staircase. Kusunoki agreed and followed Shizuki to a more secluded spot where they could talk privately. Shizuki gently advised her not to mention their middle school to Hebawa, because Hebawa went to that school too. Kusunoki was surprised to hear this. Shizuki explained that Hebawa's name back then was Takasaki. He asked Kusunoki if she remembered her from their middle school days. Kusunoki shook her head, saying she wouldn't know since she didn't really hang out with anyone back then. Shizuki gently reminded her that if Hebawa found out they went to the same school, it could cause big problems. So she should avoid bringing up anything related to middle school with her. Kusunoki happily agreed with his advice. He added that if Hebawa does mention middle school, she should try to change the subject or steer the conversation in another direction. Kusunoki understood his instructions perfectly and nodded. As Shizuki started to walk away, Kusunoki called him back. She politely asked if she could contact him tonight, even though it wasn't a practice day. She said there was something she wanted to ask him. Shizuki asked if she could just ask him now. Kusunoki replied that she couldn't say it right at that moment, but she had something she wanted to show him. Shizuki was surprised and completely stunned by her words. Kusunoki explained that she would send him a photo when she got home, adding that since the photo was a little embarrassing, he should make sure to look at it when he's alone.